Hey, my name is Petra and I'm obsessed with all things birth, but especially VBAC. I am a birth doula and mom who had a vaginal birth after 3 cesareans. In this podcast, we dive deep into the inspirational world of vaginal birth after cesarean. In each episode, you'll hear inspiring VBAC stories, practical tips from professionals who've championed the VBAC cause, as well as my personal journey and how it might help you on yours. From mindset shifts to evidence-based practices, you'll leave each episode feeling inspired and informed. Get ready to soak in the wisdom, embrace the strength within, and join this incredible VBAC community. This is the VBAC Junkie Podcast. Hello, and welcome to the official beginning of the VBAC Junkie Podcast. Now, today, we're going to start you off with a VBAC story from an amazing mom. Her name is Gill, and she is a wife, mother of 2, VBAC mom herself, obviously, a doula, a birth educator, and the owner of Ebb and Flow Birth Co. She has an innate passion for VBAC and helping families and doulas navigate VBAC with confidence. Hannah believes women deserve to be respected and supported in their pregnancy, birth, and parenting choices. Don't we all? Seriously. So she is going to give us her birth story. She did have an unmedicated hospital VBAC, and she did actually have a VBAC supportive provider, which is amazing. But she did have some challenges along the way. So I'm just going to leave you with that little teaser, but I want you to really dive in and listen to this episode until the end because at the end, you're going to hear how you can work with Hannah. And if you are a doula wanting to support your VBAC clients with confidence, Hannah has something very special for you in mind. So stick around to the end, and I can't wait to dive into this episode with you. Hannah, I would love for us to just like dive right into your amazing stories. So take it away.
Yeah, so with my first birth, I did kind of what majority of people do. I went to the hospital, saw an OB, took a hospital childbirth education class because that's what like all my family members had done. I was the first one of my friends to have a baby, so I didn't really have any experience for them. So I just thought, well, I'll go to my normal OB/GYN and go from there. And I had planned to have an unmedicated birth. That was kind of what I wanted to do. I have a history of surgeries and weird things with my back. So I was like, I don't really want an epidural for various reasons. But I didn't really do anything to actually prepare for that, to go unmedicated. So I just took like what the hospital called an advanced labor class, which was like 2 hours of like trying to prepare to go unmedicated, but it was nothing really like in depth. So I did all like the normal things throughout my pregnancy, that most people do to like prepare. Like I Googled everything and read what to expect when you're expecting and all that stuff. And my son had been like measuring on the larger side. So they had actually recommended I schedule an induction. So I was scheduled to be induced, and of course they like quoted the Arrive trial. So I was scheduled to be induced 39 weeks, like 39 plus 4 or something like that. And I had gotten like a membrane sweep at 38 and 39 weeks, and I ended up going into labor at 39 plus 1. So the day after I got my membrane sweep, so I was able to avoid that induction, which I was extremely thankful for. And so it was just like the normal, like standard, like, okay, I went in as soon as my contractions started type of thing. My water didn't break or anything, but my contractions started much more intense than I was expecting. And I'm assuming that's because, like, for me, after this sweep, I think everything just got a lot more intense as far as like cramping and stuff. So the day after my sweep, I went into labor that morning. I started having really bad contractions that were like 5 to 7 minutes apart, like immediately. So I called my husband. Was like, we need to go to the hospital right now. I'm assuming like we need to go. And I got to the hospital and I was doing my best to like breathe through everything. And of course, they have you sign like all the paperwork and stuff that you were supposed to do ahead of time, but for some reason, you have papers to sign. And so I was doing that. As soon as we got back to be admitted, I was like, I need an epidural. There's no way I'm gonna get through this without it. And when we got there, I was about 3 to 4 centimeters dilated, and I got the epidural right away. but thankfully I was able to like sleep and take a nap and rest, and I progressed very quickly. So just like a side note, my entire labor from first contraction to my C-section was 13 hours, which is relatively fast for a first-time mom. So I progressed very quickly. At around 9 centimeters, my OB basically asked, so she was like, well, you've been at 9 centimeters. It wasn't a long time, but it was longer than like I was at my other other dilation points. So she was like, I can break your water if you want. If not, that's fine. And I didn't know any different. So I was like, yeah, sure, break my water. That sounds good, right? Get the baby here faster. Um, so she broke my water. And then I quickly progressed to 10 centimeters. But after that point, like we basically just labored down. Like I didn't start pushing right away. I just labored down for a while. My OB, she specials her patients. So even if she's not on call, she'll come to your birth, which was the kind of situation she was in. So she was going to see her like clinic clients or clinic patients and coming over when I needed her, basically. So after laboring down, I started pushing and I had a really, really strong epidural. I couldn't feel basically anything. I had no sensation to push. I literally couldn't feel anything. It was so strong. And I was pushing in like the basic, I wasn't laying flat on my back, but I was like in a semi-reclined position with my feet up in stirrups and all that fun stuff. And we were doing like the coached pushing, like counting to 10, holding your breath. And I was just not pushing effectively whatsoever. And my labor nurse really didn't do much to help that. She like told me to like push in certain ways, I guess, but never said like, oh, do you want to try a different position? Because I didn't know that even with an epidural, I could push in different positions. Like I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, I think most people actually don't realize you can push, I mean, labor or push in different positions once you have an
Hmm.
epidural. They think you're just like stuck to the bed. But
Yeah.
like now, like they can break that bed down in so many weird ways, and you can have like
Yes.
a squat bar, you can be on your side on all fours. Like there's
Hmm.
so many positions.
Yeah, and I didn't know that. And I was like looking back, I'm like, why didn't my nurse mention any of that? I'm like, maybe she didn't want to do any more work than she than she had to do. I don't know. But she just even my husband mentioned like she had gone out of the room for a minute and he was like, I think it's like she should be helping us more. I was like, yeah, probably. I don't know. But anyway, so I pushed like that for almost 4 hours. And it was at that point, like my son was going down and then coming back up and going down and coming back up. And my OB had mentioned, she was like, maybe we should start, thinking about a C-section. Like you've been pushing for a really long time. Like I was super swollen. And it was at that point, I was just like, are you kidding me? Like I had not at all prepared like for a C-section. It was not on my radar. I thought, oh, this only happens in emergencies. Like, why is this even being mentioned to me? So I felt just kind of shocked and confused. And I want to mention it wasn't an emergency C-section. It was just an unplanned C-section. So most hospitals will label that like emergent, but it wasn't. We were both stable. Everything was fine. There were no problems. So it was one of those situations where my mom came back, my mother-in-law came back to like see us beforehand, and like everything was very lax. It was just I'd been pushing forever, and we had found out that my son was asynclitic. So for those of you that don't know, his head was tilted sideways instead of being lined up straight with the birth canal. So he was just having much more trouble getting through, especially since I was on my back, pushing with an epidural, it made it harder. So during the actual C-section is where things got really like traumatic for me. So although my epidural was super strong, like during the C-section, I felt what I interpreted as a lot of pain, like more than I thought I should be feeling. So I was crying. I was telling my husband like this really hurts, like something is wrong. So he told the anesthesiologist to if he can give me some like more medication. And I like just dozed off. So I became like incoherent. Like I had no idea what was happening. So that's where the trauma started because I don't remember like meeting my son. I didn't hear him cry. I kind of woke up and heard my husband yelling like, "Babe, it's a boy," because we didn't know if it was a boy or a girl. But I was just out of it. I was loopy. Had no idea what was happening. And then in recovery, my baseline blood pressure is already really low, but in recovery, I went very hypotensive. I was on the verge of passing out. I had hemorrhaged a little bit more than they had wanted with a C-section. Thankfully, I didn't need any transfusions, but it was pretty bad as far as like my blood pressure and stuff. So they were trying to stabilize me while I was so concerned about my son having skin to skin and breastfeeding. I was like on the verge of passing out, like having my husband like hold him so I could nurse him. Because I was just so concerned. I was like, we have to have like skin to skin and breastfeeding right away as I'm on the verge of passing out. But that was my main concern. And so that whole experience was just like, no, I wasn't put to sleep. I wasn't under general anesthesia, but I was just very incoherent. And I don't really remember what happened. So, and then I had some other like issues postpartum with a lot of pain, some traumatic things that happened, and just kind of, it just wasn't a great experience. It was really hard to navigate and deal with. And especially because I knew it wasn't an emergency. It was just like, did this really need to happen type of thing. And because of my experience, I dealt with a lot of postpartum depression and anxiety and PTSD that I didn't really realize was a problem until about 6 months postpartum. So that's when like I just started to realize like something is really wrong. I need to go get help from someone because I don't think a lot of people realize how much that is tied to your birth experience, versus just like you just get it postpartum or whatever. So I don't think people realize how the connection there between your birth experience and how your postpartum goes. But finally, around 6 months, I did go to therapy. I started doing some healing, and then realized I never wanted to have a birth like that ever again. And I didn't know what the term VBAC was. I just assumed like, oh, people just go on to have a vaginal birth after this, right? Like this isn't like I don't understand what the whole like the big deal is about it. But then once I started doing research, I was like, holy crap, like people there's pushback against this. Like this is a big thing. Um, and this is gonna take some work, I guess. And but I started preparing like I was like 5 weeks postpartum, like listening to like podcasts and like researching. I'm like, I'm not even thinking about having another baby right now, but I know that when I do, this is not going to be how it's going to be.
I love it.
Uh, so I, yeah, started researching like in the middle of my maternity leave, and I was like, I don't know when or if we're going to have another kid, but I just know I need to prepare next time a little bit differently, actually a lot differently. But in my state, I do want to mention this. I'm in Indiana, and I didn't know for my first birth, like I knew people had home births, but I didn't know what a birth center was, like a freestanding birth center. And they do have them in Indiana, but it's illegal to have a VBAC in a freestanding birth center. Because I had wanted that as an option, but then I looked into it and I was like, oh, okay, well, that's no longer an option for me because it's against the law, like actually against the law. And so then I looked into potentially a home birth as an option. And when I interviewed some midwives, like either they wouldn't service my area because I'm like south, like pretty far south of Indianapolis, kind of in a rural area. So they were like either wouldn't service my area or they wouldn't support like a primary VBAC. So if you had never had a vaginal birth before, they like wouldn't take a VBAC. And then the closest one I found was like 2.5 hours away. And I was like, I don't really want to drive that far to see my midwife. I'm like, like I'm not gonna mess with that. So I looked into, and I hired a doula. I interviewed doulas like before we even conceived, so I knew who I would want like when I got pregnant. And so I had my doula, and she gave me some suggestions as well. I interviewed a few other OBs and like some hospital midwifery practices, and I ultimately just decided to stay with my OB at the hospital. I had birthed that before because she was like, this is rare. I know this is rare, but she was like 100% on board with the VBAC. She was like, well, yeah, like that's fine. And she had like which was, I thought was like, okay, this is normal. But now I know that most OBs and people have really hard time finding a supportive provider. So she was like, yeah, that's fine. Like, there's no issues. Like, as long as there's not anything like a clear problem, like a transverse baby or like whatever. Like those reasons we know a C-section would absolutely be necessary. She didn't require me to be like have an epidural or like be induced by a certain date, like fine going to 42 weeks. And we know that most women go into labor on their own before 42 weeks anyway. So there weren't any like major issues with like having her as my support, and I like trusted her completely. So this time around, like I said, I hired a doula. I knew 100%, regardless of what happened, like I wanted to be unmedicated. And I actually put in the work to actually make that happen this time. I hired a doula. I took that a hypnobabies course, because I knew that above anything, like my mental preparation was going to be what I needed to do the most, because I tell this to people, like my pain tolerance didn't change. It's not like my body changed. It was my mental prep and the work that I put into it, and actually doing what I needed to do to have that unmedicated birth is what made the difference for
Yeah,
me.
and
So,
I, I think that's so important. Like, I love that you're emphasizing that it was a lot of mental work because I hear
mhm,
so much women tell me, like, well, I don't have a very high threshold for pain.
mhm,
And, I try to tell them, well, this is different. This is different than like stubbing your toe or slicing your finger open. It's different sensations in your body that you're going to feel. And like, there's a purpose to these sensations.
mhm,
So, I don't know if you get yourself in that mental state where you're just so prepared for it and you have like tools to refer to, like those non-medical comfort measures, a doula helps immensely because they can make suggestions and you don't even have to think about it because they're just
mhm.
helping you along the way. So I think that's great that you're emphasizing that. I think it's important for everybody to hear that. Even if you have a low, what you perceive to be pain threshold, I think you're a little like tougher than you think.
Yeah, because, and this is such a weird comparison, but I compare it to like running a marathon. Like your mind is going to give up way before your body does. Like it's just you telling yourself, "Oh, I can't do this. This is too painful. This is too hard." Like change your mindset a little bit about it. Do the mental preparation because you can do it. You are doing it. And
Mhm.
there's much difference between like pain and like you're truly like suffering and your body can't do what it needs to do because of the state you're in. So there is a difference there. And I knew like 100%, like I'm going unmedicated. Like I don't care. Like that's it's happening. I'll do whatever I have to do to
Absolutely.
make it happen.
Yes.
So, and it was funny because throughout my pregnancy, everything that I felt like I didn't want to happen, like happened. So I had a partial placenta previa. I was GBS positive. At one point, my baby was breech, and I was like, "Are you freaking kidding me?" Like, I'm trying to have this VBAC, and like all this stuff is happening, and like I had a subchorionic hemorrhage, so I like bled throughout multiple parts of my pregnancy.
Oh my
I was
gosh.
borderline hyperemesis, ended up in the hospital to get fluids from vomiting so much, and I was like, "Really? Like, it couldn't be easy, could
Wow.
it?" Like,
Wow.
I was like, I have a supportive provider, but like everything else is going downhill.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh. That's
so,
wild.
and I tried like not to let it all stress me out. I was like, you know what? It's fine. Like none of these things are stopping me from like having a VBAC. Like it's good.
Yes.
So like the only thing that potentially would was like if my previa didn't move type
Mhm.
of thing. So they just monitored that. Oh, and I also had a marginal cord insertion. I don't know
Oh my
if
gosh.
so like my cord wasn't attached to the middle of my placenta. It was like off to the side. And then I had no idea what that was. Like that was not
Mhm.
something that I had like read or prepared for. And the major thing with that is like there could be potential like lack of blood flow or nutrients to the babies. You just kind of have to see like are they growing okay? Like is that blood flow fine there?
Yeah,
Um,
and then I know one of the risks also for people that don't know, because it is on like the edge of the placenta, like
mhm,
that big main blood vessel. If you
mhm,
get your water broken, it has been reported that sometimes they can actually nick that when they're trying to pop your bag
mhm.
and you could bleed. So
Yeah.
that's like crazy.
Yeah, and thankfully it wasn't like because there's multiple types of weird cord insertions. So there's like
Hmm.
marginal, there's eccentric, and then there's I don't know how to pronounce this right,
Filamentous.
villamentus, where the vessels are actually all like on the outside, and that's like a major thing. So thankfully it wasn't like that much of a concern, but it was just something like we just want to make sure your baby's getting like blood and oxygen,
Hmm.
obviously.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, like all these things were happening, and I was just like, oh, I was starting to get discouraged. But then I was like, you know what? It's fine. Uh, and then I also, this is another thing, but with both my pregnancies, I have gestational thrombocytopenia, which is like a low platelet level. So you have like a risk of like if it gets too low, if you want an epidural, like you might not be able to get it because there's like a bleeding risk. And I was like, okay. So I had to watch those things too. So all these things happening. And I had decided at that point, like throughout my pregnancy, like I wasn't going to get any cervical checks. I wasn't going to get like any intervention that I didn't absolutely need and want. So I went into labor. I chose not to be induced. I was not going to be induced. I was like, unless I'm like sitting at 43 weeks, like I'm not being induced. Um, unless like if something happened, like I had really bad preeclampsia or something. Uh, so I didn't have any checks. I didn't know like where I was at any point in my pregnancy towards the end. I had like signs of labor, but nothing major. And at 40 plus 2, I woke up that morning and I had like an excessive amount of bleeding I had no contractions at all up to that point, other than like Braxton Hicks. Um, so I woke up and I was like, that's like a little bit more bleeding than I am comfortable with. Because I had like subchorionic hemorrhages throughout my pregnancy with like slight bleeding, but this was like a lot. So my first thought was like, oh gosh, my placenta is abrupting. Like that was and I wasn't in pain, so I knew it wasn't a rupture. But I thought, okay, something's wrong with the placenta. So I called my doctor, texted my doula. I was like, I'm having some really heavy bleeding and I'm gonna come in and all of that. And I had no contractions at this point. So we got to the hospital and thankfully my husband, he was home that morning. He wasn't at work yet because it was early enough for him not to be there, and went to the hospital and got admitted or into triage, and they had checked my dilation and did like an exam because they wanted to obviously find out where the bleeding was coming from, because obviously their first thought was you're having an abruption as well. But I was about 4 centimeters dilated, and they put me on the monitors. Me and the baby were fine, like there were no issues at all. And they had just assumed at that point, once they knew it wasn't an abruption, that because my placenta was still low lying, it wasn't a previa, but it was low lying. So with how fast I was, maybe I dilated super fast to the point where like my placenta was so low that it was causing some extra bleeding. So we were monitored for about an hour and I was going to go home. I was like, well, I'm going to go back home, right? Like and go labor at home, clearly. But after an hour, my contractions had started picking up a little bit where I could actually like feel them. They weren't painful, but I could feel them. And I had already dilated another centimeter. So I was like maybe we'll stay. Uh, and this was about 8 a.m. When I decided like, okay, like we'll stay here. We won't go back home. So I texted my doula and let her know what was happening. And we got back to our birth room, and since I was GBS positive, I did decide to get antibiotics. Like that was fine with me. So, but I did not want a continuous IV. I did not want to be like hooked to anything. I had wireless monitors. So they did like the first round of antibiotics, and then I had them like detach the IV so I could get up and move. So after that, I had tried to lay down, like listen to my Hypnobabies tracks, but I was just so annoyed with like my head, like I had these headphones, like this headband that was like headphones, so they wouldn't fall out of my ears. But I was like annoyed with it being on my head. I didn't want to lay down. I had a peanut ball between my legs, and I was like, this is just not comfortable. Like I need to be up and moving. And after I like had repositioned and my water had broken on its own, I was about 5 centimeters at that point when my water broke. And I was like, okay, like I'm 5 centimeters, my water broke, like my contractions are doing good. I texted my doula and I was letting her know, like, hey, like my contractions are getting more intense, my water broke, like maybe just start heading this way. So, and she was like, okay, yeah, like I'll be there in my as soon as I can. And we weren't like super concerned or anything. And at that point, I was like, you know what? I need to go. So it's TMI, but during both my labors, like I have really bad bowel movements, like constantly, just like all the time. And we know that's like normal for your body to like try to get everything out.
Oh
So
yeah.
you have more room for your baby to get out. But
Hmm.
I was like, you know what? Like I have to go to the bathroom anyway. Like I'm just gonna go to the toilet and labor. And so at this point, like contractions were really picking up, and I was laboring on the toilet. I was swaying, and my husband was rubbing my shoulders and wiping me down with a cool washcloth. And then I started shaking. And then I started sweating, and I like took my hospital gown off. I was butt naked. I was like, I don't even care. I don't even care. And I was sweating. My legs were trembling. I was like moaning and groaning. And I told my husband, and it was just me and him in the bathroom, and the nurse was out. in the birth room, and I told him, I was like, I need an epidural. Like, I think I need one. And he was like, well, Julie, who was our doula, he was like, Julie's not even here yet. Like, let's wait for her to get here and we can reevaluate. And I was like annoyed at him. I was like, whatever. Like, I need an epidural. Like, leave me alone. And then the nurse came in. She was like, are you guys doing okay in here? Because it had been like 45 minutes that we were just like in the bathroom, and like that can be kind of like,
I
oh, why are
love
you in the
it.
bathroom?
Right.
She was like, are you okay in here? And her name was Morgan. And I told her, I was like, Morgan, I think I need an epidural. She, and everyone knew at this point, like, you're in transition. And I knew in the back of my mind, like, I'm in transition, but I was in denial. And she was like, well, you don't have an IV for fluids, so that's going to take at least 20 minutes to like get that hooked up and get fluids going before we can even get an epidural placed. And so she knew like what was happening. And then right then, like my doula came in and I was like, Julie, I need an epidural. And she was like, well, how long have you been on the toilet? And I was like, about 45 minutes. And I was like, why are my contractions? They were on top of each other. Like I had
Mm.
no break. And she was like, well, let's try getting off the toilet. Like, let's get in the shower, get some water on you. And I was just like, there's no way I'm getting off this toilet. You are insane.
Yes.
And but they like convinced me, they coaxed me. They were like, well, let's just like try to get up and move. And we finally got into the shower. And as soon as I was like vertical, I was bearing down. Like I was pushing, like gravity just did its thing.
Yep.
And there was like no stopping it. And it was so funny because my husband, he forgot to pack his birth bag. I was like, I'm not packing your bag. You can pack it. So he had gotten in the shower with me with his sweatpants on, and like he was getting soaked because he had no like trunks or like shorts or anything. And I'm like hanging on his neck, swaying and like bearing down. And um the nurse and the OB came in and they were like they could obviously tell I was pushing, and they were like, well, is it okay if like we check you? Like we just want to make sure there's like you're fully dilated. You're not pushing against like a not complete cervix because then it'll swell and cause other issues. So I was like, yeah, whatever, like fine, check me. And I was complete, but like just like a slight lip. I can't remember what side it was on, but so my doula recommended, well, let's get you on hands and knees, and that'll help like alleviate that position and like help that lip like move back because I wasn't like about to have them push my cervical lip back. I was like, no, that's not happening. They didn't even offer that. I was like, no. So we moved to the bed again reluctantly. I was like, do I really want to move right now? No, I don't. But we moved to the bed and got on hands and knees. And the OB, it's funny because my OB was on call like when I had called her that morning and got to the hospital, but she had just ended like a 24-hour call. And I was like, yeah, like just like leave, go home, go to sleep. Like you've been up for 24 hours. Like I don't think you need to be here supporting that. But so I never met the OB that was at my birth. And she just happened to be like extremely supportive, like hands off. And
Awesome.
we were talking about like pushing positions, and she was like, yeah, I mean, I can catch a baby in whatever position you're in. And I was like, great, that's awesome because
Wow.
you're going to, even if you don't, like even if you don't want to.
But that's so rare. I mean, I've heard doctors, like, I've been in birth rooms with clients where the doctor is like, you can't be on hands and knees, turn over. Like, I don't know how to
Right.
catch the baby like that. And I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's awesome.
And my doula had mentioned it because she was like, well, she was wanting to like push in like a different position. She was like, yeah, that's fine. Like I can catch a baby however. So I started off on hands and knees, and my doula and I both knew like we had done a lot of processing like during my pregnancy that pushing was going to be my like mental feat. Like that was going to be like the hardest part for me to get over because it took like almost 4 hours before my C-section. And we just knew that was going to be the hardest part for me. So I started pushing on hands and knees, and we pushed in that position for about 10 minutes. And again, like it was my daughter, but we didn't know at the time if it was a boy or a girl, but she kept coming down and going back up. And I was just like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, this is what was happening last time. Like, what is the problem here? Um, but then my doula had suggested, well, let's try getting in a squat. Like, would that be okay with you? And I was so exhausted at this point. I was like, there's no way I can hold my body up in a squat. Like my legs are gonna give out. But we got the squat bar on, And I like was holding onto the squat bar, like kind of on my armpit. So I had my arms over the squat bar. My husband and my doula were supporting me, like holding me up. And within 5 minutes, probably two pushes, like my daughter like flew out. Like
I
it
love
was
it.
she came out so fast that she didn't have any head molding. She was just
Hmm.
like out so fast with after getting in that squat position. And it was so funny because during my pregnancy like prep, my doula had mentioned like if you use a squat bar, make sure like when you bring your baby to your chest, like go under the bar, not over it. Of course, I went over the bar. I was like trying to bring her to my chest, like the umbilical cord's getting all wrapped around the squat bar. And I was like, okay, that's not working.
Yeah.
So and obviously I'm like in this like labor lane. I'm like, okay, like get my baby on my chest type of thing. And
Hmm.
we finally got her to my chest, and I was just like so excited. Like at that point, I didn't even care what happened. I was like, I don't even know. Like I tore, had a second degree tear. I didn't even notice it.
Yep.
Um, and I was just like so, so happy that it went that quickly. And well, yes, I was happy that it went that quickly, but also it was the most intense 4.5 hours of my entire life. Like that was my entire labor. And it was like almost precipitous. And I was like, I don't know what's like what would have been better, like a super long, like kind of spread out labor or like this really intense fast one. But at least
Yeah.
it's over with now. Like she's here. Um, but the only issue I had was uh I had some retained placenta. Like the placenta was like not fully coming out, and they thought that it was like completely out at the time. I didn't find out until like 6 weeks later that there was still some in there.
Oh my
So I
gosh.
ended up having to get it removed because it was causing some like major abdominal pain and like some excessive bleeding as well
Oh wow.
postpartum. But other than that, like everything was great. My daughter was great. We were both healthy, and we left 24 hours later, and everything was good at that point. So
Oh, that's amazing. I love that so much. So how did you feel after? Were you just like, "Oh my gosh, I did it." Like,
yes, like I was just I was shocked really because the pushing was so fast
mhm.
and that I was prepared, like mentally prepared to have to push for hours. Like I was like going into it thinking like, okay, I'm gonna be pushing for 4 hours again. Which was okay with me. I was like, I will push as long as I gotta push to get this baby out of me and not have a C-section. Um,
Yeah.
and there were like she just came out so fast, and I was just like, I freaking did it. Like I was over the moon. Like I have a picture of me like like crying so hard. I'm like laughing, and it was such an amazing experience. And I was just really just thrown off by how fast everything went that I didn't really have a chance to like absorb what was happening.
Right.
But I was just so, so happy.
Oh, that's so beautiful. So, I mean, like you said, there's so many challenges. I mean, you didn't have like the challenges of not having like a supportive OB, but you had a bunch of other things happen. But what like changes or improvements since like you're now a doula
Mhm.
and you support VBACs and birth in general, what like changes or improvements would you like to see in the way like VBAC is approached or supported?
So I really wish more women knew that VBAC was an option for them because the VBAC rate, so the amount of women that have had a C-section that actually choose to have a VBAC is only about 13 to 14%. But 80 to 90% of women that have C-sections are good candidates for VBAC.
Right.
And they just don't know it's an option for them. And they're presented as like, oh, once a C-section, always a C-section, or VBAC is too risky, or VBAC's not as convenient as a repeat C-section, which I mean, I don't know what is convenient about a major abdominal surgery, but
Yeah.
whatever. Um, but just like knowing that it's an option for them and just realizing that based on their certain like circumstances, like if they want to have a vaginal birth, they can. Like they don't
Hmm.
have to go straight to a C-section. So just more awareness and education of that, like VBAC is a thing because I've talked to so many women that don't even realize what a VBAC is or that it's an option for them. Um, so they don't even try to pursue it.
Yeah.
So I would really love to see like in general, like that VBAC rate go up, the amount of women that are choosing to pursue a VBAC for that rate to go up.
Yeah. And I mean, I was in that pool of women that didn't even realize, like, for one, what a VBAC was, why there's
Mhm.
so much, like, I don't know, stigma against, like, why we should even or could even try for one, especially if you have like a supporter or excuse me, a provider that's not supportive of VBAC or the hospital they attend has a VBAC ban, like then people don't know they have options unless they research. So I think it's great that we like try to bring awareness to the fact that VBAC should be mainstream. Like it should be mainstream to where we don't
Mm.
have to dive so deep into research to figure out that we can do it. And there's ways that we can, try to support that.
Yeah, it should just be the norm. And
Yeah.
because like I've heard so many people say like, "Oh my gosh, like you got a VBAC?" Like, wow, like they're just shocked by it. Like they don't
Mhm.
even, and there's just so much fear around it. Like, oh gosh, you're brave. Like that's risky. Like, not real.
Yeah.
I mean, major surgery is pretty risky too. So,
Exactly. And I think
yeah,
that's exactly people don't realize like because C-section is made to be like it's no big deal. Like,
right.
it's just one way that babies can be born, which yes, it is one way like babies can be born, but it's not normal. There's nothing like normal about it. It's like a major abdominal surgery.
Mhm.
People who have minor surgeries are given way more like tips on like, hey, you should take physical therapy. You should do this after
Right.
your surgery. And us, we're given like this one page paper on look out for this and good luck. Goodbye.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just like, yeah. So I really wish there was just more awareness around it and knowing
Hmm.
that it's an option for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how do you feel like it's beneficial to have a doula, whether you plan a VBAC and then end up with a cesarean, or you do have your VBAC? Like,
Yes. So with my first, like I didn't know what a doula was, but even with my C-section, like I wish I would have had a doula present. I know every state and every hospital is different on if a doula can be present in the OR with you. Some hospitals are great about it, others are that's like an absolute no. But just having someone there, especially if you end up in a repeat C-section, or even a scheduled C-section, like ahead of time, having someone there to like walk you through what's happening, to support you while maybe your partner's supporting your baby after they're born, someone to help establish like skin to skin in the OR and breastfeeding in the OR if you want that, someone just to help advocate for your choices because when you do end up with like a C-section, like you feel like really out of control, like you don't have a choice over anything. And just having someone to really help you establish a plan for like you still have a choice in this, to really get that established ahead of time and knowing like for a VBAC, establishing a plan for, okay, yes, our goal here is to have a VBAC, and that's what you're wanting, but here's a plan on your options for if you end up in another C-section and how you want that to look. So you do feel like you have a little bit more control. And just having someone that knows how to navigate the process of like VBAC and C-section, and being that support person for you.
Absolutely. Yeah, because when the mom, as we both know, laying on that table, getting your abdomen cut open, it's surreal. It's like you're
Mhm.
drugged up, you're loopy, you're in a fog, and then in some cases your arms are strapped down to this table and you don't have that immediate connection with your baby. So having that extra person there to make sure that all your needs or wants are honored is so beneficial. And I've heard people say, like, why would you even want a doula during a C-section if you had one? And it's
Mm.
like they can help control the environment. They can help facilitate that bond between you and your baby faster so that you don't feel like you're just a fly on the wall while everything's happening over there and you're kind of stuck to this table. So,
And especially so now as a doula, like supporting, I feel like being educated as a doula on how to support a VBAC client is even applicable to supporting all my other clients, whether they've had a C-section or not, because ultimately, the goal of having a VBAC is to prevent a C-section. So if you know how to support a VBAC client, you know how to support a regular client in preventing a C-section too. So I think having that knowledge is so important of like how you yourself and your clients prepare for VBAC is how everyone should be preparing for their birth and really just owning their decisions and practicing their autonomy and having control over their birth and what they're doing and their decisions and choices that they're making.
yeah, absolutely. So, in your experience, like, do you have any tips for doulas who, are trying to help support their client through VBAC or a cesarean?
The number one tip I have, and I don't think enough doulas do this in general, but is helping your clients process their previous birth experience. Because your client could go see a chiropractor and eat all the dates and get acupuncture and do spinning babies and do all these things. But if they have leftover trauma and mental blocks from their previous birth, there are going to be some major issues that come up, especially in the middle of labor, where that they could have flashbacks to their birth or PTSD or something like that. So just helping them understand what happened in their previous birth, helping them process that and release their fears is like the number one thing you can do as a doula to help a VBAC client or even a repeat C-section client. Because if they end up having to have a repeat C-section and there's trauma surrounding their first C-section, they're just going to be more trauma added on to that. So really helping them process that, even if it wasn't like an extremely traumatic event or a birth for them, just understanding like what happened in their first birth and like walking through that with them.
Absolutely. I think that is a beautiful tip. That's always what I go to first too, is because for me, in my personal experience, I had a lot of trauma that I didn't even realize I was holding on to until I did
Mhm.
that. So, Hannah, you also are doing something really incredible for our doula community, and that is you're creating a VBAC specific doula course. So,
Mhm.
I would love for you to talk about that right now.
Yeah, so in January of 2024, I will be officially, it's been a long time coming, having my VBAC program for doulas out, and it's called VBAC Flow for Doulas. And it's going to be a full program on how to best support and confidently support your VBAC clients. So, like I said, like knowing how to support a VBAC client is going to benefit all of your client support, not just your VBAC clients.
I love that. So, when exactly in January are you introducing this?
So it will be open for enrollment starting January 15th through January 25th. So that will be the time frame that you're able to enroll into the course in the program. And it's going to be like there'll be a one-on-one support from me as well. So it's not just like a take it and go with it type of thing. You will have support from me as well. And there will be just a lot of great content and resources provided to help really boost your doula practice and to become more educated on VBAC and hopefully, like I said, like increase those VBAC rates for women.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for that. So, if somebody were to want to work with you or just get in contact with you, what would be the best way to do that?
Yeah, so I do in-person doula services as well. So I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana area, and I'll service anywhere from a hospital to a home birth to a birth center. So all of that is in person. And then you can find me on Instagram at Ebb and Flow Birth Co. That is also my website, so ebbandflowbirthco.com. And then I also have a podcast called the Ebb and Flow Birth Show, where I talk about a lot about feedback, birth, motherhood in general. So you can find me over there as well.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so honored that you came to talk to us about your story. It's going to benefit so many women.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I could literally tell my story over and over again and talk
I
about it
feel
all
you.
day. Yeah.
Yes. All right. Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the VBAC Junkie podcast. Make sure to leave a rating and subscribe to the show so that you don't miss an episode. And also, I have a free gift for you. If you would like to have a guide on how to prepare for a VBAC, head to my website at www.birthingcometrue.com/VBAC guide. And all of this will be in the show notes, so you can just click that link and head there and download this free guide. I hope you have an amazing week. Until next time, bye.